Welcome to the Berkshires Gone By, history and folklore about the westernmost and most beautiful county in Massachusetts. I'm your host, Brooke. I love old graveyards. Or to be more precise, I love old stone carvings. Whether it be chiseled graffiti or huge carved monuments, I adore it all. And what better place to see the old works of the old stone cutters than in old cemeteries? Since I was old enough to walk up the road from home alone, I'd visit the old church on the hill cemetery in Lenox. There I'd inspect the fine work, the carved willows, flowers, and effigies. When I finally got my first vehicle, Deanna and I would scour the county with old maps, looking for lonely cemeteries full of beautiful old art, but also for stones that told a story, and many do. Some are subtle, like the stone of a mother shared with a baby who isn't even old enough to be given a name, but that both died on the same day. Perhaps they both died during birth. While other stones, they almost yell their tale. One cold day, I came across one such graveyard, set back away from the road, but neatly maintained. It's the old Center Cemetery in Monterey, Massachusetts. And at the back, against the tree line, I found a very interesting stone that's inspired me ever since. But that was at a time when research was much more difficult than it is today. Thankfully, that has changed. So here's an episode about the mystery behind the stone I found that day, and why, over 15 years later, I'm still thinking about it. This is the story of Lafayette Battelle. Lafayette was born in 1831 in Troy, New York. His father came from France, and his mother from Connecticut. They were Lee and Anne Battelle. Battelle is sometimes spelled with or without an E at the end. The family relocated to New York City. Not much else is known about his life until he reached his early 30s. That was when he enlisted in the Union Army on May 2nd, 1861, and served in Company C, New York 4th Infantry Regiment. He was promoted to full sergeant on October 31st, 1862, and then full corporal on January 5th, 1862. He survived the Civil War and was mustered out on May 25th, 1863, in New York City. It was at this point that he made his way to Litchfield, Connecticut, where he worked to save money. When he had saved enough, he then moved to the Berkshires and met Martha Leonard. She was a Sheffield woman who caught his eye and also his heart. Born December 21st, 1841, which made her 10 years his junior, she may have thought her chances nil at that age, as women tended to marry much younger than she then was, for she was 25 and Lafayette 35 when they wed in New Marlborough, Massachusetts, on January 2nd, 1866. Lafayette used his savings to buy a sprawling farm in the town of Monterey, and they began their life there as a farming couple. It remained just the two of them for what probably seemed like forever, before finally, 16 years later, they had a son and named him Samuel. The date of his birth was May 22nd, 1882, which unfortunately means he got to spend only 3 years, 32 days, with his mother, as she died on April 22nd of 1885. This left just Lafayette and his young son. She was buried in the old Center Cemetery in Monterey. Lafayette bought for her one of my favorite styles of grave marker, a beautiful white bronze monument. White bronze was a marketing term, as the monuments are actually made of zinc. Though beautiful, These markers were very affordable and easily customizable, with decorative bolt-on panels that could be removed later and replaced with another plaque bearing the name of another person, should someone be added to the plot. Decorative plaques were emblazoned with flowers, bunches of wheat, anchors, birds, hands pointing to the sky, wreaths, crosses, and much more. And most of these grave markers were manufactured in Connecticut. These hollow metal monuments have remained nearly unchanged, the lettering and beautiful plaques still crisp and readable, while carved stones of the same age have worn. Martha's zinc monument seems to have suffered a crack at the base, and its pinnacle decoration has been knocked off, perhaps by the falling of a limb from a nearby tree. But it's still stunning. Lafayette obviously loved her dearly. 15 years later, the 1900 census shows Samuel, at age 18, still living at home with his 60-year-old father. The census from 1910 shows him still there, at the age of 27, unmarried, enlisted as a farmhand on his father's farm. A little later that year, Samuel is gone, and Lafayette is still living on the farm, which was suddenly mortgaged to the bank, with a woman named Letty M. Hakes, who was his live-in housekeeper. By then, though, the seemingly lonely Civil War vet had befriended a young boy named Frederick Turner, Jr., aged 12. He was born in 1903 and lived right down the road, but across the town line in Great Barrington to the west. Young Fred delighted in his older friend's exciting stories about the war, and helped Lafayette and his housekeeper Letty with the tasks around the farm. By this point in his life, hard-working Lafayette had become an icon in the town, renowned for his fine horses, of which he was quite proud, and flock of award-winning hens. He was known to be strong-willed, and after year upon year of hard farm work and the trials of his long life, he'd developed a toughness that young Fred admired. On the cold winter morning of December 12th, 1915, Fred made his way to Lafayette's house for his usual visit, but upon reaching the home, he could hear an unfamiliar voice inside. He peered through the frosty window, and for a moment saw a young man talking with Lafayette inside. Fred decided to head back home and not intrude. This probably wasn't the business of a little boy. That night, a monstrous blizzard struck the Berkshires, burying the land in deep snow. On the 13th, the chores around his own family's farm took far longer than normal. Digging out has always been tedious work. Even with 5 siblings, it took the family a while to get through their normal routine. So it was later in the day than usual before Fred and his 8-year-old brother John trudged through the deep snowdrifts to get to the home of his old friend. But before they could reach the house, they had to pass the barn. It was there that he was startled to see that there were no tracks in the snow, which meant that Lafayette hadn't been out to feed the animals. Curious, Fred pulled open the barn door and went inside. There he found the horses, nickering with excitement that the boy might be there to feed them, and the poor hens, though they had all gone to their roost for the night, no one had been out to close them up inside the little room, so they'd suffered the bitter draughts of the brutal storm, and most had died. Fred ran to the house, bounding through the deep snow, and threw open the door. There was no fire in the stove, and everything was cold and still. He shouted Lafayette's name, and moved from room to room, but then saw his friend there, laying in a stain of blood, gray, tied upon the bed. Fred and John had never made it home so fast, snow or no, and there Fred told his parents what he'd seen. They thankfully had access to a phone, still rare in 1915, and called for help. Great Barrington Police Chief William J. Oshman put together a task force to hunt the killer. This included state detectives Edward Sherlock, Thomas Bly, Michael Barrett, and Joseph Daly. They didn't find a whole lot of clues to ID the killer in the house. Just a mess, and that Lafayette's watch was gone, apparently replaced by a strange pair of boots. The one who helped them the most was young Fred Turner himself. It seems that his memory was so precise, his description of the man he'd seen through the window so vivid, that it sparked a recognition for the chief. It reminded him of a farmhand who'd done some work in Sheffield. The word was spread, and a kind woman in New Marlborough informed them that she had given a man fitting that description a meal a while before the murder. She had felt so bad for him that she also gave him a pair of boots when she saw that his were in tatters. Her description of the footwear matched the boots that had been found in Lafayette's home. Chief Oshman knew that it had to be the same man, and so they learned his name was Mike Ryan. A little more sleuthing, and conversations with a few other people who recognized his description, and the detectives learned that that was in fact a fake name that he had been using to cover his tracks, but that his real name was Michael Joseph Glasheen. It was soon known that a frequent haunt of his was Bank Street in the city of Waterbury, Connecticut. Police, wearing mostly street clothes, began to frequent the businesses in that area, asking questions and acting like they were looking for an old friend named Mike. They also found the watch he'd stolen in a pawn shop nearby, and then they found him and promptly dragged him back to the Berkshires. Meanwhile, Lafayette was laid to rest, not far from his wife, and his stone still reads, the stone that started me on this search, Lafayette Battelle, a brave soldier of the army that preserved the Union and freed the slaves. He escaped the perils of many battles, only to be foully murdered in his own house in Monterey, December 12th, 1915. All this while, Michael Glasheen cried self-defense. The Fitchburg Daily Sentinel reported that on February 24th, Michael Glasheen had confessed to killing Lafayette, but that Lafayette had threatened him with a gun and ordered him out of his house, into the blowing blizzard. Michael, fearful that the angry man would follow him outside, and then shoot him anyway, found an opportunity as they walked to the door. Michael took a piece of split firewood from a pile as he passed, and swung it around, knocking Lafayette across the head. He then tied the dazed and bleeding Lafayette to his own bed, and took this opportunity to ransack the house, stealing his watch before fleeing into the storm. Unfortunately, though it may have been unintentional, Lafayette died there, in that bed that night. Michael Glasheen was held without bail while awaiting his trial. When his trial date finally came, it took the jury only a few mere hours to convict him of murder. He was sent to Charlestown State Prison in Massachusetts to spend out the rest of his years. As years passed, he became increasingly dangerous, throwing fits, attacking other inmates, and raving about his victim. So in the interest of safety, he was moved to the Bridgewater State Prison, a place that was better suited to deal with those who might be going a bit crazy. It seems that the figment of the man he'd killed followed and talked to him, and in the end drove Michael mad. His World War I draft papers list him as 25 years old. His birthday as July 22nd, 1892, and his birthplace as Tipperary, Ireland. He's listed as tall, medium build, with azure blue eyes, and dark brown hair. It lists his former residence as Woodbury, Connecticut, but current home as Mass State Prison, and in the medical field is written mental condition in doubt. 1926 was the end of his road, and still confined behind bars in Ward number 26, Michael Glasheen died. So what became of Fred Turner and his perfect memory? After the murder, the whole family moved across town to West Plain Road, Great Barrington. He moved to Pittsfield when he grew up, and married a woman named Madeline. They were married when he was 22, and she was only 17. At the age of 27, he lived with her and his 3 small children in a rented home at 22 Broadway. Remember, though, that around 30 years ago, house numbers were changed to accommodate 911, so what was number 22 then may not be 22 today. Fred found work as a lineman for a Western Massachusetts electric company. 10 years later, he was living on Marcella Avenue in number 44. This time, he owns the property, and he's been promoted to the position of foreman. And what became of Samuel Battelle, Lafayette's dear son? Well, it seems that the young man had been sent away by his father, who may have been finding it hard to care for him as he grew older. You see, I came across poor Sam's World War I draft card. It lists him as living in Gardner, Massachusetts, as being of medium height, medium build, with hazel eyes and brown hair, and there in big letters, as from a large stamp, at the top corner, and along the line entitled Occupation, is pressed the word insane. A few years later, in 1920, he's still there, in the Gardner State Colony, an asylum for more docile and cooperative people with disabilities, who could gain enjoyment and therapy from working in gardens or on small building projects. It seems that Lafayette may have mortgaged his farm so that he could afford to send his son somewhere that he thought was best for him. Sam vanishes from the record after 1920. It's not known where Samuel is buried. Of the many people laid to rest in the Gardner Asylum Cemetery, only a slight fragment of those are documented, or their graves marked. Sam could very well be one of those whose location has been lost. It's highly probable that he is separated from his parents by the length of almost the entire state. I hope that despite their distance from each other in this physical world, they're reunited in the next. In this little cemetery, set back from the road, hidden in the tall trees, this bright patch of sunlight in the forest, is where I found the stone of Lafayette Battelle, which inspired me to find out more. But he and his wife aren't the only ones buried there. There are quite a few people laid to rest in that place. More people with more stories, be they dramatic or frightening, exciting or lovely. This has been The Berkshires Gone By, created, written, directed, and read by myself, Brooke Grenier, and co-produced by Deanna Garner. You can find us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. More episodes are also available there, along with images related to our topics. You can email us at theberkshiresgoneby@gmail.com, or find all of these things and more at www.theberkshiresgoneby.com. We hope you'll join us for our next episode. Thanks for listening.